I don't know how I'm going to do this, but okay. Let me see. Hey, why are they moving furniture now? Hi guys, sorry it took a bit of time to get the audio right. I'm going to sort out TikTok now because we're going live on TikTok for the first time. I'm gonna try and raise my voice a little bit because my voice is very low due to like a very entertaining night last night. Okay, so just don't touch the tripod, Claudia. Hi guys. Hi, how are you? I know a lot of people have been anticipating this live, so I'm going to do all of the usual stuff that I usually do. I'm gonna try and read comments. Just let me know, give me a thumbs up like you always do if my audio is good, because yeah, I'm having issues with this cable of this mic, and I'm getting extremely hot. I don't even know what's going on. So just give me a second. Let me just get this sorted out. So hi. If it's the first time you watch one of my lives, my name is Melinda, and I talk about narcissism, abuse, healing, those kind of topics. And if you've been seeing a lot of my commentary in the last couple of weeks, I've been commenting on one particular issue. I do believe this will be the last video and the last live that I do on this. Because I feel for the most part we need to let whatever needs to play out. I also need to be respectful of the people that I'm talking about in this video because both of them are now deceased. I didn't say that previously, and I'm realizing now that we live in South Africa where death is taken very seriously, and we need to also be respectful of the people we are talking about. But at the same time, I wanted to use this as an education opportunity. So I'm going to state the same facts I do every time I live in a very noisy place. You're gonna hear, like, I can hear water from here. The people are moving furniture upstairs for some reason, so you can hear everything. When someone laughs, you can hear them. So I'm sorry, I'm just gonna keep talking if you hear those noises. Claudia is in the room helping me just navigate everything that we're gonna talk about. Thank you guys on Instagram for letting me know what the audio is like. So if you've been following my stories and what I've been talking about the last couple of weeks, I finally got a copy of Melinda Ferguson's book, When Love Kills, The Tragic Tale of AKA and Anele. And I read it in a record time. I like reading, but I have ADHD, so it takes me a while. But this book was, I'm going to say, it was one of the easiest books that I've read in a long time. It was very easy to read, which was surprising for me. So before I get into the book, I am going to state a few, I think, things that for me, I need to clear up on my end, right? There's been a lot of talk online since Melinda's book the cover was leaked on my birthday, no less, which happens to be the same day that Anele passed away. And Melinda has been attacked for being a white woman telling non-white stories repeatedly. And what's interesting to me about this is we have a tendency to divert the conversation on people of color to the wrong people. And this is exactly why I wanted to do this live, because we don't sit enough in critical thinking spaces. And what I mean in that is trying to understand the nuances of people's lives, who they are, the situations and the times enough to make a concise decision on what we believe. We just go on this tangent, and there's been a lot of commentary online about the fact that Melinda is white. Now, I have watched her podcasts that she's done talking specifically about this, especially the MacG podcast. And what's interesting to me is I'm a person of color. I will fight for a person of color any day of the year. But what frustrates me about this is coming from those spaces, I know how reluctant we are to tell our own stories. I have seen this, I've experienced it. I have people who said to me repeatedly, why do I share details of my story and why I'm willing to talk about vulnerable or topics that we're supposed to keep behind closed doors because we are afraid of letting people know our truth. So Melinda stepped into this role. She really did her due diligence because, I mean, the research that she did on AKA, guys, that was a feat, okay? I'm sorry, people are rude. Who's phoning me? Like they wait for me to go on live and then film this. Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna have to go back. What's interesting to me is that I get bashed by a lot of people who are my own skin color for being as open and honest as I am about my life and about these stories. And then when someone is willing to step in and tell the story that we are not willing to tell, we have the audacity to say to them they're not allowed to tell our stories. How many of us are actually telling our stories from a truthful point of view? We want to be inspiring and motivational, so we're writing books from that directive. But we are very rarely, and I've seen very rarely, non-white books in South Africa that are written from a gritty, raw point of view. Melinda herself has written her own story in its purest form. So we need to really, really consider the fact that we are so afraid and so shamed by our own histories that we are not even willing to discuss the intricacies of it in circles, much less sit on platforms like this and talk about it. So I feel like it's a South African thing to beat someone up for something they've done that we weren't willing to do, which is exactly why we are struggling as people of color, because we don't stand for one another. That is my stance on this. You can come for me. It doesn't matter, because y'all are probably going to come for me from this whole review anyway. So I did say in the week that I have some very interesting thoughts that are actually very far from what I'm assuming most people are thinking I'm going to talk about. Based on my previous lives, I had a very particular point of view about this story between AKA and Anele. And it was based on the little bit of information that I had. What was on the media, the videos, the pictures, some stories that were swirling around that we couldn't verify. And that was all I had to go on. But this is why it's also important to recognize that we really don't know anything until we have more context. This book has given me a ton more context. Context that, I'm not going to lie, surprised me. Within the first few chapters, I picked up on a few things that didn't necessarily make me feel very good. And it didn't make me feel good because from someone who understands how abuse and narcissism works and can recognize it in people at any time, I probably got this one very wrong. And maybe it was a little bit of my ego, but at the same time, it was probably also the fact that I was hoping that the book was just going to confirm the things I already said and I believed. So that didn't in fact happen. And this is interesting to me because the book is so heavily focused on AKA's life. It might as well have been an AKA biography, to be honest. But the reason why it's so heavily focused on his life is because he had such a public life. Everything you needed to know about him was in the public. He was brandish and grandiose and egotistical and full of himself, and he was doing it all over online, in the media. He did not shy away from a fight online. He did not. He was showing up as himself everywhere, which, to be honest, wasn't the greatest guy, right? I mean, he would have not been someone you would have wanted your daughter necessarily to pick based on the kind of arguments that he was having with people online, the kind of things that he was saying about people, the kind of business deals that we have no verification for what was going on, but the kind of things that he was involved in. And then it's the hip-hop culture in South Africa, which generally is toxic in nature. I think hip-hop culture in the world is toxic. If you look at Kendrick Lamar and Drake's argument right now, that literally spells the entire thing out for you, right? The culture is toxic, and they thrive off toxicity. The female rappers and hip-hop artists in South Africa who have managed to keep a good rapport, I really respect them, because to be honest, it's very hard to do that in this culture. It is very what is the word, patriarchal. It's a man-eat-man world. Best girls, sleeping with everyone, partying all the time, drug abuse, all of the things are there. So at first glance, you'd assume, even based on the things that you read on about AKA, that he was abusive. But if you understand how narcissistic personalities work and how abuse works, you will realize that they are the key aspects that confirm him being a full-blown narcissist are not there. And that surprised me. I was going into this book hoping to tick all of my boxes. Yes, he does this, he does this. Look, he had a lot of narcissistic traits. Undoubtedly, we all know this. But the one key aspect about a narcissistic person is that they do not have the ability to change, right? It would take them going to therapy for years, actually for the rest of their lives, something that they're not willing to do because they can't admit that something's wrong. There are things that he does that really stood out to me. And some of the behaviors he had in his former relationships, there aren't much details, but there's enough to go on that tell you how his relationships were going. You can tell when someone is narcissistic based on their relational history. And we have a full-blown, very beautifully colored history on AKA in this book. So this is the thing that stood out to me right in the beginning. We know nothing about Anele. Nothing. Which to me is an oddity. And I understand why, right? There's been stories going around, Melinda spoke about it herself on the MacG podcast, that people were afraid to talk. That for me is a red flag. What are they afraid of? Who are they afraid of? This girl was so young that there should have been nothing necessarily that they would have been afraid to talk about. That's the first thing. Secondly, y'all know my best friend, she's around Anele's age. She's around Anele. She's now around what Anele's age was prior to her passing away. She's an introvert and she has more friends than Anele seems to have, because there's nobody talking on Anele's behalf in the book. No one saying, it's only like her dad is quoted multiple times, right? He's the only person who curates this girl's personality and who she is. Then we have maybe a statement from one of her lecturers. But really, there's nothing to tell. And I get the story is she was young and she still had a life to live and still had to solidify who she was in the world and make a mark. But she was old enough where people at least would have had the bare minimum to say. And that to me is very concerning, right? There's no way there isn't some sort of footprint. And there wasn't enough history for me to go on, but there were a few red flags that I picked up through the story. So, I'm first going to categorically state, I don't think she jumped. And now reading the book, and not based on any persuasion by Melinda, because what she was actually very good at doing was trying to be as neutral as possible without swaying you, unless you already have bias towards these cases. But if you don't, she tried very carefully not to sway you emotionally towards what she believed, right? And I like that about the book. I think that's why it was so easy for me to read. But because there's so much information on AKA, it would be easy for anyone who comes out of an abusive relationship to side with the fact that he was doing stuff to her. And funny enough, me reading the book, that didn't happen with me. I was reading it and seeing things that to me, like were in my face right from the beginning. So, like I said, categorically, I don't believe she jumped. And now I'm going to tell you why I don't believe she jumped. So, go down this road with me. I am stating this as what I believe might have happened. I cannot say what happened. I cannot say I know what happened. None of us can. But based on the education on abusive personality types, I'm going to tell you a scenario that that really came to me while reading this book. There's a section where they talk about, so this is, I mean, you can take this or leave it. Please just don't come for my throat, because at the end of the day, if you're not reading all of the books and doing all the education that I'm doing, then we're not having a conversation. But right in the beginning of the book, they talk about Anele's mom passing away at the age of 12. And instantly, I got up. When I read it, I got up. I had to take a walk. Because in my mind, it was like, this is something very significant that happened to this child. It is not focused on almost at all, which I can understand, because people don't really want to talk about death in this country, but they don't understand the impact of death at that significance to a child of that age. And the reason why this thing particularly stood out to me is because from the research and from the people that I have actually interacted with who are have extreme narcissistic traits, something significant happens to them around that age. An abuse experience, a death experience, and it's always accompanied by a level of neglect. So in my mind, I read this and I'm like, maybe I need to stop going in with the idea that I'm going to confirm my own narrative on this and see where the story takes me. And then the little nuances that started to come through towards the second half of the book are things that confirmed my belief a little more, right? So essentially, I'm going to explain how these people end up being narcissistic in the first place. Something significant happens. They're usually neglected at a very young age. And with a young girl who's 12, who loses the most important person to her in the world, nobody can fill that void. And from what I can tell from her sibling statements, that void was being filled by things. There's no way your father's going to be able to take a maternal role. And I'm sorry to say it this way, in South Africa, a black Zulu man who is busy, who is running whatever it is, running very, very business, how can I say, business orientated, financially wealthy, that kind of thing. He doesn't have the time to sit to nurture what this child, who is literally going into puberty, needs, because she needs a mother at that stage. That was the first thing that stood out to me. People can say I'm wrong all they want, but for me, I'm taking a logic stance on this. 1 + 1 must make 2. Then her siblings say that she's spoiled. Her father says she isn't spoiled, but they were very close. Now I'm like, what is interesting to me about that whole thing is the entire version of who Anele is was played out by her father solely. I don't like, for me, it doesn't make sense when someone can give me a version of someone's behavior from one direction. Do you know what I'm saying? No, this person was amazing. They were this, they were that, all these beautiful, amazing adjectives. I feel like if you are continually giving me, and I don't know if it's because the person is now deceased that they talk that way, but in a book like this, honesty matters. Because we see the parts of AKA that I'm pretty sure he wouldn't want to put all together in a book. And then Anele is given to us on a silver platter, beautiful, sweet, intelligent, wise girl. And that's all? People are too dynamic for that to be all. Right? So that was the first thing that stood out to me. And then, when we're talking, there was a section that I think really brought it home for me, was when she was talking about AKA saying that his manhood was essentially being thrown in his face. So he's not man enough. He's not, he was basically being insulted by Anele. Now the reason why this stands out to me is, let me explain. They started their relationship in lockdown. Narcissistic people choose to isolate you because it's easier to manipulate, control, and to abuse you in that space. Now, I'm not accusing any one of those things. What I'm saying is just take the literature into context. Lockdown would be the perfect environment for this to happen, so that you get to really hone in on who they are. The narcissistic person really gets to hone in on who they are, gets to know what they like, what they don't like, gets to understand how they can use what vulnerabilities they have, so they know when to use those vulnerabilities against them. So when he said that she was saying that he wasn't man enough, we know from his history that his ego was the biggest selling point for him. He used his ego for everything, which is why he was getting in nonsensical arguments on Twitter for just to put his balls on a silver platter to say he's the man. So if someone is attacking his manhood, of course he's going to retaliate. Added to the fact that it's very clear that he was emotionally immature and he wasn't interested in actually doing any work on getting better in this area, right? We know this just from his blatant behavior. and his wild spending and his wild vacations. Image meant everything to him. And that, I think, in itself would have been enough for people to say, no, this man is abusive and he's narcissistic, but it isn't. Because that is only one characteristic, right? There are multiple things that we need to put together. So when you barely see it. In the context of the book, you barely notice that statement compared to everything else that is being discussed, right? But I noticed it because I was like, what if this relationship was strategically put together? So this is the scenario I'm going to play out. I'm not saying this is what happened, but this is where my mind went, right? You're going to get some insight into the way that I think. Is that this young girl loses her mother. She is vulnerable. She has nobody she can trust. She needs to stand for herself and decides that the only way that she can do that is to make sure she gets everything she wants so she feels valuable. Because now the most important person who's supposed to nurture and help her develop into a young woman is no longer there. The neglect is now being exacerbated by the fact that money and things is a replacement for a person. So what she's learning at this age is that I feel valuable if I get everything I want, right? And this is the story that's playing out in my head as I'm reading. Now, AKA is online. He's spending money. He's going on vacations. He's doing all of these amazing things. When he was dating, what is her name? I don't even remember her name. They went on special vacations and he was spending tons of money on her and all of those things. Now we're seeing all of these things online. This man is just splurging. He's just looking like he's got all the things. He's so famous. Girls just want to be with him. And this little girl is sitting there looking at this guy thinking, well, if I'm with you, that automatically makes me more important because you have the money, you have the things, you have the status, and I could actually feel valuable and important by being with you, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because multiple times we are told over and over again that she was not a pushover. She knew what she wanted. She was not someone who was going to say yes to everything people wanted. And to a degree, it sounded like she was a little bit demanding. And that tension with the demanding and the sweetness for me is something I was just like, there seems to be a little bit more here that we need to get some insight to. So let me just keep taking you down this trajectory. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, she meets this guy. And because he's emotionally mature, immediately he is attracted to her. Now remember how many times I've discussed how easy it is to be attracted to a narcissistic person because they come across as so likable and because they know how to be exactly what it is you need from the beginning. So he's had all these famous girlfriends before, he's had issues in and out with Zintle, he has overlapped with relationships, he's never had stability, and here comes a sweet, quiet, together girl who knows what she wants, and she wants to stabilize his life and give him a quiet home and a quiet family. So they go into lockdown. And in lockdown, they are alone, doing all of these lovely things online, showing everybody their beautiful relationship, which gives her enough time to curate the relationship in exactly the way she wants. Which includes something that kept being mentioned that I don't think anybody paid attention to. This argument that she didn't like his relationship with his baby mama. That to me is a red flag. The second a woman walks into a relationship and she knows this man has a child, besides the fact that he is famous, everybody knows who his child is, everybody knows who his baby mama is, and then wants to shut that relationship down because she feels insecure about it, and then to top it off is not happy about the fact that she doesn't have a relationship with his mother, but then never ends up fostering that relationship, that to me is concerning. Right? So this is happening throughout lockdown. Then this thing in, I think it was November, the blow up that they had ends up coming out to the media, and he didn't want anybody to know. But there was something that was said in that line for me that was interesting, and it was the fact that it seemed like this was not the first time that they'd had an altercation of this level, and he didn't want people to know what was going on, because to a degree this was a private matter. Which means when they were alone, these blow-ups probably happened very often. Right? Now, let me just make a very clear statement. I do not think AKA is a victim. I do not think he was a victim. He can rest in peace, but I do not believe he was a victim in anything. Oh, there goes my earring. Might as well take the other one off. I do not believe he was a victim in anything. But I also have to really take into consideration that we do not have enough education on what narcissistic relationships look like when the woman is the narc in the situation, especially when she's a vulnerable narc. And this could very plausibly have been what was going on. Because this is the other thing. Someone said to me the other day, after I told them my thoughts after reading the book, that we must, I must be very careful about how I orchestrate these words. And I get that. But I also have to make a distinction here. There's a difference between someone being abused and reactive abuse, right? And in most relationships where the man is the one is not the narc, where the woman is the one doing the emotional and mental abusing, there's a lot of reactive abuse, which she then uses as a way to get him into trouble. Now, I'm talking about literal stories I am speaking to people about, and stories I have seen where the men will not acknowledge that they're in abusive relationships, because when she antagonizes him by calling him less than he's not a man, he's never going to be the right man, and repeatedly leaves him, which is also a pattern that happens in their relationship. There's this push and pull thing happen that makes him so addicted to this attachment issue. He refuses to acknowledge the fact that this may be an abusive relationship. And I've had a few men say to me, I wish we talk a little bit more about this, because we as men refuse to acknowledge when this is happening to us, because it can't be true, right? It can't be true that she is calling him out on his name in 5,000 ways. And then when he ends up pushing her, which I'm not saying is right, but when he ends up pushing her, then in his mind, especially if he's an empath, in his mind is like, oh my God, I'm hurting this woman, without recognizing the antagonization. And let me tell you what's the most interesting part, is that abusive men use this to abuse women as well. They poke you, and I've said this in a couple of videos, poke you until you lose your mind, right? Then you lose your mind, you go crazy, and then they say, can you see, you're the problem. Women do this 10 times more. There are relationship after relationship after relationship. We have seen the women who antagonize the men, and men do not have the same inhibitions that women do. They retaliate physically. That doesn't make them necessarily a victim, but we also need to recognize that there comes a limit. So I'm saying this to say this. When I read the book finish, and then I really looked at the images and at the videos and stuff, or the screenshots of the videos that are in the book, I saw a different scene. Especially when she's sitting on the floor. You know, the first time when she sat on the floor with that video and said, you don't know what he's doing to me? In my mind, it was like this man is doing something to her that she's afraid to talk about. But then reading the book, afterwards I looked at it again, and something came to mind. Every single narcissistic person I've ever come across, if they are angry with someone for something and they are retaliating, or they are coming for them because they did things to them, when you ask them what did they do, they can't seem to answer you. They never have an answer, which is very curious to me, right? So in that video, now she's sitting and saying, you don't know what he's doing to me, you don't know what he's doing to me, you don't know what he's doing to me. I'm like, what is he doing to you? And why at no point have we even like with her friends and stuff, why has none of her friends come out and said, this is what he was doing? We have no verification for what exactly happened behind those doors. But from an educated point of view, when you really look into in between the lines of the story, I smell the rat from the get-go. I was telling Claudia on Friday morning or Thursday morning when I was reading the book, I said to her, I feel super uncomfortable because something about the story is no longer making sense. The whole time I thought I had it. And now reading the book, there are just some things that you know narcissistic people will do that are not coming from AKA. He wasn't controlling in his relationships according to the book. I mean, his previous partners are not saying much. And I've heard a story, someone said to me Friday morning that there was an altercation with Nadia and a guy. We don't know much of the details, but I'm going purely off of what I read of the book. But he didn't seem to be controlling in his relationships. The fact that he was able to foster a really good relationship with his daughter really doesn't speak of a narcissistic personality, because usually narcissistic people are controlling in those kind of relationships, and they try to take the child and turn them into a version of them. That did not seem to be the relationship that he was having with his daughter. And based on the relationship he's having with his mother, and Zintle and the mother's relationship, none of those things speak to a narcissistically abusive person. Those highlights didn't come through, and I was expecting to see some of that. But I was seeing more interesting things on Anele's side, and the fact that her history is so limited is very concerning to me. AKA's history my version of things, literally vindicated him from being the one who's beating her up. Now, I've heard stories about he hit her in the club or whatever. But this is why reactive abuse is so damaging, and why in the court system you cannot even use it, because it's very easy to poke someone or manipulate someone into physically harming you and then crying abuse. Just a couple of weeks ago when I was in Johannesburg, I had a roundtable. It was unintentional, a roundtable discussion with a couple of women. And when I was explaining to them the traits, one of the ladies who sat next to me said she thinks her brother is going through the same thing, because this cycle that keeps happening. This woman is calling out abuse, but she's trashing their house every time. She was burning his clothes. She was throwing, I don't know, she did something to his clothes. They don't know what to do, because when they try and call the cops, and they did call the cops on her eventually, but when they try and call the cops, she says he's abusing her, but she is throwing regular tantrums that don't make any real sense. And that is the thing for me, is that the hysteria that we see on her part, I didn't find answers for why that even existed. Now, in the same token, we can say that he was probably the one who was antagonizing her and all of that. But based on his history, which is so well laid out in the book, that doesn't seem to be the case. AKA, to be very honest with you, seemed like he was more talk than action. The time when he smacked, what's his name? What's this other rapper's name? He was not even supposed to be there in the first place. There's no evidence, or his history doesn't point to a pattern of abusive behavior in specifically narcissistic ways. Those things are very particular, and you can't move away from them, right? This is just the way that I saw it. But I wanted to talk about my change in view, because what I'm finding interesting about this is that everybody has decided to take their own narrative on this. And I have people coming on my YouTube telling me, no, she jumped. And I'm like, were you there? Then I have other people saying, no, this girl was crazy. And I'm like, how do you know? Because the truth of the matter is, we are not willing to do the actual reading and research ourselves. Melinda did her due diligence. She really did her due diligence. And a lot of what she speaks about in the podcast covers drug and alcohol abuse. I don't know about drug and alcohol abuse, so I can't speak from that perspective. But I can speak from an abuse perspective, because I understand this. And at the end of the day, I'm not saying this is what happened, but what my sense is saying is that there's too much here that doesn't make sense after reading the book. There's too much that doesn't make sense about why there's so many people who are silent about what happened. I get we don't want to talk about it anymore, but now there's an inquest coming up, right? There are people who have watched these people's lives and literally worshipped them, and think that it's okay, number one, to act like AKA did, which wasn't okay for the most part. But also, it is giving, we keep giving South Africans a reason to believe they can get away with anything. Because we keep teaching our children over and over again through these stories that are in the media, that are making lots of noise without any context, without any information, without any education. We are teaching our children that it's okay to be any type of way, treat people any type of way, be abusive, all the things, and they'll get away with it, because we keep letting people get away with the stuff without actually breaking down the details of these stories. So I did my part. As you can see, the notes that I put here, I think I should read some of them. There was some things that were very interesting to me. Okay, that was just about AKA and his relationship strength. This is when I was still thinking that, maybe this book is going to confirm everything. And then it didn't. He did do some shady stuff. I mean, I think everybody does. Oh, yes. The one thing that I came up in 2 of the podcasts that I wanted to address is that I love the fact that Melinda said that on a drug binge, that you're not sleeping at night. So you're up at 3 and 4 a.m. I did say this in one of my videos on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know if anyone was paying attention. But do you know the narcissistic people argue with you at that time of the night? There's a reason why that they do it. There's a psychology behind it. If you argue with someone who's tired, they don't have a choice but to agree with you at some level or give you what it is you want, because you do not have the bandwidth to reason when you haven't slept. So they'll start an argument with you late at night from 12 o'clock, and then they'll argue with you for hours. I've been in arguments that are 3-4 hours long from 12 o'clock at night, simply to wear me down enough to give in, even though the thing that's being asked of me is extremely unreasonable. Because when you're exhausted, you do not have the bandwidth to make a wise and concise decision on anything. So the fact that I came up a few times, I was just like, yeah, but this could also be the reason for that, right? One of the things that I wrote here, why was this NB? Sorry. The relationship experts say that an addiction to love can be just as lethal as an addiction to hard drugs and heroin. There's a dangerous thing here that I'm seeing happen around this conversation, which this is my only criticism, I think, is this idea of having an addiction to love. You cannot be addicted to safe love, because safe love doesn't do the push-pull thing with you. It doesn't do the I need you or I'll die. And this relationship was not safe love at all. It was toxic to the core. And what the addiction was the toxicity. We must be very careful to align this kind of relationship with love, because love is not harmful, it's not dangerous, and it doesn't leave you laying on the floor dead. It doesn't do that. It's just point blank, period. This idea, and I said this in my first live, of having a passionate relationship, which is, I love the way that Melinda broke it down in the book. Passionate relationships are not passionate, they are dangerous. And depending on who you are, you can decide where that danger is coming from. But without the education, we are highly likely going to look in the wrong place. And I can openly say I might have done that initially, right? Because based on what I had. But reading the book, I'm starting to think that something else went on. The other thing that also stuck out to me about abusive relationships is this: I'm going to leave you and then I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to leave you and I'm going to come back, I'm going to leave you and I'm going to come back. Narcissistic people have an abandonment wound. So what they do is they leave you before you have a chance to leave them, and they do it repeatedly on a cycle. From what the book says, AKA never did that. And what they do is they leave you, but then they try to stay in contact with you to make sure that you are still pining for them. Because they need to make sure that that toxicity is still running through your veins, right? That toxic longing for them is still running through your veins. So they keep you basically on a leash, and then they come back. This happened on and off, and Anele was the one who kept leaving and kept going back to her father and then coming back over and over and over and over again. Which to me is a very big red flag, because honestly, if AKA was a narcissistic person, he would have followed her. And he would have stalked her, he would have harassed her, he would have done all of the things, because it would have activated his abandonment wound. So the fact that he went downstairs and was planning to get another room, and then was on a phone. Look, he says he was on, he left his phone upstairs, but then there was a video of him being on the phone downstairs, that kind of thing. That's the story. The narrative in my head was that he was ready to leave and get out of the situation. And then whoever's phone, I don't know who was lying, whatever, that she called him to come back upstairs, which is why he got another key card and went right back up. What then transpired is anybody's guess. But I do not believe that, in my personal opinion, and you can tell me I'm wrong all you like, I am just stating what I believe happened. I do not believe that he was physically abusing her. I do believe that everyone keeps saying they were both toxic, they were both abusive. But there's always an antagonizer. There's always a catalyst to this. He was not like this in his previous relationships. The book will tell you that. If this was, I loved how her father said, she was never like this before he came into the picture. He wasn't like this before she came into the picture. But we have so much history on him that I'd be able to tell you if this was more likely him antagonizing the relationship repeatedly. He never antagonized any of the other people that he was with prior. This is why I said past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. We need to be very careful to really witness entire stories in a holistic way, without being naive and taking the first narrative we jump on because we have a particular bias towards it. We need to be really, sober-minded when we are reading books like this. And unfortunately, because this is such a tragic story, and because someone did end up dead, and now both of them are, we become so emotionally invested that we don't take apart the parts that can educate us, and we don't actually critically think through the things that we see happening. We just jump, and I did the same thing. We jump to the only conclusions we can find, right? So yeah, I'm planning to have a lot of hate after this video, and you know what, that's cool. But I've tried to do the book as much justice as I possibly can. Melinda did a good job on the book, I'm not gonna lie, so you guys need to get it. I enjoyed reading it. I don't necessarily like reading books of this type, so the fact that I'm saying I enjoyed reading it is a big deal. But I just want us to be a little bit more critically thinking. Anele should have never ended up dead, and I still remain on that. However it happened is not for me to say. AKA wasn't the greatest guy, and he did also show that he was trying to change. They are both not here now, so respectfully, we just have to take whatever comes with that. But at the end of the day, we need to start actually using our brains and stop using our emotions to make choices on what we think has or hasn't happened, because this is how we don't see people who are being abused in every second household in South Africa. So yeah, I'm gonna read some questions. I don't know if there's any questions on TikTok. We're doing TikTok for the first time live, and I don't really know how it works, so there's that. Let me see. You can ask questions if you have any questions. I'm going to read them on Instagram. Anything on YouTube and Facebook I'll answer later. Let's see. I think that life is too fast. I almost like something was chasing them. Yeah, the relationship happened also too fast. I mean, that is like the biggest thing when it comes to these relationships. When you develop this super fast connection, and now all of a sudden you're the one, and all of a sudden you're getting married, and all of these things are happening in such a short space of time, and for most of that time you were in isolation. We have to kind of read into that a little bit more, because there's no way all of those things are happening in such a short period of time, right? Without real exposure to the outside world, and without people who are important to you actually being able to look into the relationship to verify if that is healthy or not. Because it's very clear that it wasn't healthy. I mean, their parents knew. Their parents were trying to get them to decide to break up. But by the time the parents became aware of how bad things were, I mean, when Anele was on the roof and all of those things, it was already too late, because they were already so wound up in this really toxic cycle with one another. And AKA also didn't have the emotional bandwidth to even understand what was going on, despite the fact that he was 10 years older than her. That's the other thing. People keep saying, yeah, it's so bad when a man wants to date a girl 10 years younger than him. Look, this is hip-hop culture. The younger the girl, the better, according to them. I don't approve, but the younger the girl, the better, number one. But then the other thing also that we need to consider is maturity doesn't come with age. He behaved like a 21-year-old until this happened, and only started to grow up after that happened, right? So yeah, let's see. Claudia, do you have any questions while I'm looking for others? My ex-narc tried that and I had to cut that off real quick. I still don't think he killed her still. The girl was abusive. Well, look, I'm looking at the science of... So, okay, let me tell you a funny story. Last week we were in Cape Town, in the city, and we were... What were we doing? We were gallivanting. We walk around in town at night. And we happened to walk past the paper club. It was really by complete accident, right? It was Wednesday, before I got the book.
Saturday.
Huh? Was it Saturday? Okay, before I got the book. And I did the 5-meter measurement because, I mean, since I was there, I might as well have. She landed in the road. There's no way if she jumped, she would have landed there. So there's that. Anele unfortunately was the one. Please tell me if the book spoke about her mom also being suicidal. The book barely talks about her mother, which is also a red flag to me. As much as it's physical, it's also spiritual. Yes, so for those of you who understand the spiritual aspects, go read up on Delilah and Jezebel and then connect it to narcissism. That's all I'm going to say on that. Does the book speak about... Yes, it does. About her attempted suicide in Durban, and it was not an attempted suicide in my opinion. Based on the story, she just really needed him to pay attention to what it is she wanted. She was very insecure. That comes through clearly. She was very insecure. The fact that she was insecure over Zintle is wild to me because this man made a decision to have a child with this woman. Her responsibility would have been to respect that relationship. So, how long did it take you to read the book finish compared to other books you have read? Jeez, girl, I think... How many, Claudia? I probably read the book in like 7 hours, 7-8 hours.
It was about a day.
No, it wasn't a full day because I started reading half day. It was the night when I got it, and then half of the rest of the day from the afternoon was from 12 o'clock.
Okay.
Because I went to gym.
So about 12 hours?
Yeah, maybe 12 hours. Compared to other books, it depends. So most of the books that I read is actually, ask Claudia, I have more like textbooky books than anything else. It depends. I have ADHD, so I really need to be engaged. Audiobooks are my thing, so I can sit in an audiobook for a long time. But this book I read literally in a fraction of what I read other books. What is your take on the title Melinda did? The title Melinda did an outstanding job. So When Love Kills. I think it's a good title, and the reason I think that is because it tells us exactly what happened without knowing what happened. I also realize now that I'm looking at it. So if you don't know what the book looks like, that's what the book looks like. Now that I'm looking at it, the book, I don't know if Melinda realizes this, but I'm a photographer and videographer, and I did graphic design. So in my mind, I'm looking at this and thinking, you see where AKA's picture is in the book, on the book cover, and where Anele is. Everything is leaning on one side. Anele's history is so blank. Look how blank it is behind her. I don't know, that was just something that I thought of. But yeah, if there's no other questions.
It's almost like she's in his shadow, essentially.
She is in his shadow, but this is how vulnerable narcissists operate. They become you in the background and nobody knows. Nobody knows that it's happening. That is the hardest part about all of this, and this is why this book, I needed to talk about it, because whether my version was accurate or not, we need to be realistic with the fact that if we don't understand the nuances of how narcissistic people operate, the chances are that all of us are going to be caught behind the bitterness, the revenge, and the envy of a vulnerable narcissist. And the way that they will try and control the narrative behind closed doors without us knowing any better is actually very dangerous. I really do believe that vulnerable and neglectful narcissists are the most dangerous type, because they're not the kind of people who are walking out in the street telling everybody how great they are. They're the ones who are sitting in their envy of you and finding very careful and curated ways to bring you to your demise. And that's very scary and very dangerous. I'm going to keep saying this. The movies that we watch, did you watch it? The series. I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. The one on Netflix that's not still on #1. I can't get to the serious name of the comedian. That woman is a vulnerable narc. She's not displaying her life everywhere. And what's so interesting about that show to me is you can see the psychology behind the person who is going through it, how their empathy is used to manipulate them repeatedly. Because you feel sorry for this person and this person is trying to destroy your life. It's wild. Yeah, but I don't think I'll ever be in a place where I feel sorry for those people. Because that level of empathy to me is a level of psychopathy that leaves people dead, especially in South Africa. So yeah, when she announced the engagement on Instagram, she basically said all the girlies said it would end in tears. I saw that, and the jokes on them, which I think speaks to the insecurity she had. That's my point. It's like she won this prize and she needed to have this prize on her arm, and everybody needed to know about this prize. And in the background, this prize was being manipulated, being gaslit, being told how useless they are. And you can never tell a man that. The second you tell a man that, you are asking something for him inside him to wake up. It's not an excuse, but it's human nature. Yeah, I want y'all to get the book and then read it for yourself. I know a lot of people are not going to agree with what I'm saying, because the book essentially, it can very easily make AKA to look out like an abuser. That doesn't negate the fact that she ended up dead and he was the only person in the room. So I'm not saying he was a victim either, for that reason. But it was nice spending time with you guys. I probably will not talk about this case again. Never knew that there's a team such as vulnerable narcs. Girl, there's so many types. There are so many types. Those are the ones who are victims, are perpetual victims of their own existence. All day, every day, everybody is so against them. Watch those ones, because those ones, those ones are they're so intelligent. They know just how to ruin your life in a way that nobody knows it's them. But anyway, thank you so much for joining. This video will be on Facebook. I will share it. I will save it on Instagram, and it will be on YouTube as well. Please, guys, subscribe to Only This Life. I am begging you with all of me. I'm gonna keep begging y'all. In 2 weeks, my friend Megan is going to be on. This week, me and Phineas talk about marriage, divorce, and sex after that, which is going to be interesting. So sign up on YouTube, and comment and share. I love you guys so much. Thank you for being here.